Hi everyone and welcome to our July live webinar. This topic is going to be creating your water and oil emulsions. Now I know I get loads of questions on this, so I'm going to start with a little bit of a presentation, a little bit of a webinar talking you through the formulation of water and oil emulsions, and then I'll open up for live questions. So please just hold off on your questions. I may actually answer them before we get to the question stage. Now, if you need a copy of the presentation, I do have a PowerPoint presentation for you. You can contact us info@personalcarescience.com.au. If you already have our free video, free report, free formula folder, it is in there. Look for the folder called YouTube Lives. In that folder, YouTube Lives, you will find all of our live PowerPoint presentations. So that is available in there now. And of course, after this session's finished, this replay will be available on our YouTube channel. And of course, you can always contact us for any of our free formulas and free reports. The One Dropbox link has all of those free formulas in there. So again, we get a lot of questions about water and oil emulsions constantly. So I thought we'd do a live on it to talk you through some of the formulation technology behind it. There's also a growing number of exceptions that kind of break the rules of typical water and oil emulsion formulation technology. So I'm going to go through those exceptions today as well for you, because definitely it can be a bit confusing if you're learning water and oil formulation techniques and then you see these exceptions. They completely break the rules. How do they break the rules? I will explain that later, but it's important to remember that when I'm going through those exceptions, if you're not using those exact materials, then you need to revert back to the standard water and oil formulation principles. So again, just a little bit about the Institute. If you don't already know us, we've been around for 15 years. We have 5 very highly qualified and highly experienced trainers. Everything that we do is 100% online, so you can study at a time and place that suits you. We are as close to you as your computer. We have loads of training materials. Our Diploma of Personal Care Formulation does give you the qualification of cosmetic chemist. It is around 1,200 hours of study, so it's certainly not what you'd call a weekend course, and you can't compare it to other online training courses out there that are around 100 hours or so. It's completely different. It has got a lot of hands-on practical work that we require you to do, because you can't formulate without having a lot of that practical experience and knowledge behind you. And we do send those practical packs around the world wherever we can. There are a couple of customs restrictions where we can't send because of country customs requirements, but otherwise we have a practical pack, or you can source materials locally. We have a lot of suppliers. For example, India, we have local suppliers where you can get your packs in India from. So let's get straight into the learning, because there's a lot here to cover. One of the things I wanted to do first was show you a little bit of a diagram. I'm a big believer that pictures speak more than words. And when you're working with water and oil emulsions, you just got to remember it's almost like an oil and water emulsion, but just flipped the other way around. And we have to use a lot of, the opposite types of materials for this reason. So we have our internal phase, which are these little white drops, and we have the grey external phase. So when we are talking about water in oil emulsions, those little white drops, that internal phase is the water, and the grey area, that external phase, that is your oil. Now that oil could be any of your lipid substances, plant oils, esters, silicons, mineral oils. You can even put some butters into there, melt them down, mix them with liquid oils, and they can be part of that oil phase as well. Now, one of the things about a water and oil emulsion is that it is usually, let's not talk about the exceptions yet, let's talk about the generals, usually predominantly an oil or lipid external phase. One of the benefits of this particular structure is that it provides a nice external oil application with some water present. So instead of, say, applying a oily serum or a straight balm, which is entirely anhydrous, no water, it's all oil, you are instead introducing a small amount of water when you're applying this emulsion onto the skin. The benefits are that you end up with a nice water protective film on the skin. It doesn't have to be greasy. It totally depends on what you use in that external phase as to how it will feel. And of course, then there's exceptions where we can use lower inputs for that external phase so that the product doesn't feel greasy at all. But again, let's get to the exceptions later. Let's look at the general way of creating water and oil emulsions first, and then we'll talk about the exceptions. And the exceptions definitely are where you have a very high input of water compared to the oil. Otherwise, a water and oil emulsion is usually majority oil phase. And again, this is simply because of the way they are put together. Again, not looking at exceptions at this point, looking at the standard general rules. And that is because usually when you're creating an emulsion, your external phase is the majority of the formula. And definitely until recently, this was how water and oil emulsions were created, which meant that, one of the drawbacks is that you have to balance what lipids you're using in the external phase so that the product doesn't end up feeling too greasy. For example, if you're using a lot of plant oils in that external phase, it's going to feel very heavy and greasy like your plant oils would. It also, if you're using plant oils, has that potential for oxidation. If they're used at a very high input, you're obviously increasing that oxidative risk and need for antioxidant. And of course, usually those types of products aren't that pleasant for the consumer. Now, if we look back at the really, the really old days, the Elizabethan era, they were making sodium borate beeswax emulsions, which again, weren't good for the skin, but they were predominantly oil phase, and they were very, very greasy, but they had to use those because they were counteracting the use of their traditionally saponified soaps, which were their only cleaning agents, which were very, very harsh on their skin. Not to mention all the other sort of things they used to put into their emulsions, which of course very toxic, which we don't use today for many reasons. But what I want to talk about today is more about how we make these more premium, beautiful sensory feeling products that are water and oil emulsions that don't feel like that anymore. Okay, again, that was the older way of doing it. So with these products, definitely they are really, really good for dry and mature skin types. You wouldn't want to use a water and oil emulsion on someone with greasy skin. They're not usually used in male skincare at all because of the amount of oil that men's skin usually produces, which of course benefits their skin. And you definitely wouldn't use them in teenage type products. The products just would be far too much moisture and hydration, even if you put really light skin feel esters in there, even if you use some of the exceptions to the rule to really increase the amount of water that you could put in this type of product. The fact remains that a water and oil emulsion has an external phase, which is a lipid. And why would we do that? Because it does provide a very moisture protective barrier on the surface of the skin, which is why they're especially suited for your dry and mature skin types. But of course, that doesn't suit your oilier skin types. So you just wouldn't create these types of formulas for those consumers. It just doesn't suit them. Another thing, you usually do need low HLB emulsifiers. Now, if you're not familiar with the concept of HLB is hydrophile lipophile balance, and it's a score or a ranking that we give different emulsifiers that help us determine how they would perform in an emulsion. So again, while you would normally have a greater oil phase for these types of products, or they'd normally be majority oil phase, you not necessarily going to create a water and oil emulsion by just putting in majority oil phase. If I was using high HLB emulsifiers, for example, even if I had 60% oil phase, I'm not going to create a water and oil emulsion. I'd probably just end up with a very separated, glunky looking mess. So you do need your low HLB emulsifiers, and unless they are one of the exceptions that I'm going to talk about later, you would also need a predominantly or majority oil phase in the formula. So what else have I got here? Yes, so we wouldn't normally use water compatible rheology modifiers. This is another really important principle when you're putting together your normal types of water and oil emulsions. So again, when we're creating this standard type of water and oil emulsion, we wouldn't want to put, say, a carbomer or a xanthan gum in the formula. Otherwise, it will tend to want to gel or bring together these water droplets because they're water compatible thickeners. There are exceptions to this, and I'll cover those exceptions later. So just bear that in mind for now. When you're making these formulas, you're generally using oil compatible rheology modifiers. Why do we want to use oil compatible rheology modifiers? Well, one of the principles we have when we're setting up a water and oil emulsion, I'll just show you this little diagram. is we want to use these oil compatible rheology modifiers because we want them sitting in the external oil phase so that they can create a net, and that will help stop your droplets from moving. We also want to generally use high shear because we want a really small droplet size. If we have a really small droplet size, we can actually improve the stability of these emulsions. So we would normally high shear, we would normally use oil compatible rheology modifiers, and we would normally use non-ionic low HLB emulsifiers. And this helps us form the most stable type of water and oil emulsion using these principles, and that helps hold the water in their droplets. It helps keep the water droplets away from each other because of the low HLB emulsifiers, and of course with the oil compatible rheology modifier, it helps limit movement of those small droplets of water so that we can't get coalescence and we can't get separation. So your water and oil creams would typically be around, and again, this is general, this is what it is normally, not exceptions yet, normally be around 25% water phase. So again, you can see that there is a significant proportion of these formulas that are normally oil or lipid content. And you would then also use a non-ionic low HLB waxy emulsifier, and you would also companion this with at least one other non-ionic low HLB emulsifier. Now, if you want to build viscosity in these types of emulsions, which building viscosity in a water and oil emulsion is not usually a very big problem because they usually build viscosity quite well on their own. And that's, again, just because they're primarily an oil phase, and we use those waxy emulsifiers to help build viscosity and stability. So if you wanted a more viscous water and oil cream, you would use a non-ionic low HLB waxy emulsifier plus at least one other low HLB waxy emulsifier or waxy emulsifier blend that has a low HLB. You could use low HLB liquid emulsifiers, and that would then obviously help keep that viscosity down. If you want to make a lotion or a cream form, you do need a waxy low HLB emulsifier present. Otherwise, you'll end up with just an oily serum, which really is defeating the purpose for this type of product. If you wanted to make more of an ointment balm-like product, and I do get this question quite a lot from viewers, when you want to make something like those pore ointments or pore balm type products that always maintain their consistency no matter what temperature or climate you're in, you'd actually find that they are a water and oil ointment. A water and oil ointment is usually about 5% water, and the rest of it is lipid phase. And there's, of course, waxy low HLB emulsifiers in there to stabilize even that very small proportion of water. And in that way, because it's an emulsion rather than a balm being 100% anhydrous, absolutely no water at all, it maintains its balm-like consistency, its semi-soft, semi-solid type consistency, regardless of your climate. And this is different. I know a lot of people start making balms and they want to create those nice semi-solid type balms, and it might work really, really well at a certain temperature, but then if it either becomes a lot colder or a lot warmer, they end up with either a very solid product or a very runny product. And that's if they're making just a pure balm. You're not going to be able to get that same temperature consistency that you do from a water and oil ointment. So that's the difference there. I do have some videos. So just in case you're sitting there going, oh, this is information overload. Okay, yes, you can get the PowerPoint from me. It is written in there. I have those little proportions there, but I also have some great videos with formulas for all of these types of products. Just before I get to those video links, I just wanted to run through a couple of other important things when you're creating water and oil emulsions. One is that definitely they can feel greasy depending on what you're putting in that continuous external phase. So if you want to make it feel nice and light, but you still want it to be quite natural, look for your lighter skin feel esters rather than using predominantly plant oils. If you want a little bit of plant oil in there for marketing purposes, then that's fine, but keep that as low as possible and use more of your light skin feel esters, and that will help improve the feeling of these products. If you want a really light skin feel product that almost feels like an oil and water emulsion, wait for my exceptions part and let's talk about the exceptions, because they will help you create those more more sensory aspects like an oil in water emulsion, but they are exceptions to the rule, and they do need very specific ingredients. They won't work if you're simply using a low HLB emulsifier. They need very, very specific materials, which I'll cover in a minute. Another thing that's really, really important that I do need to cover before we get into some of the questions and exceptions is that whenever you're creating your water and oil emulsions, you'll need to make sure that you are checking and adjusting your pH if it's important for the product before you form the emulsion. Why would it be important? It could be important for other actives you're using. It could be important for the preservatives that you're using. You are best to keep that pH around 5.5 to 6. If you have really different pH levels, or if you want to do extreme pH levels with these products, you may find stability is a real challenge. But around 5.5 to 6, you'll find that you do usually get really good stability with these products. And it would normally be close to that because, again, pH of water is about 7. So if you're just doing a small adjustment before you form your emulsion, even if you're bringing that pH down to around 6.5, that is the best time to make the pH adjustment, because once you form the emulsion, you've got to remember that your droplets are very finely dispersed like that. And of course, pH can only be measured in that water phase. So if you don't test and adjust that pH before you form the emulsion, it's going to be very, very difficult to adjust it and measure it after you form the emulsion. And that's simply because if you can imagine a probe is put into this product, it's only going to measure the pH as the water droplets pass the probe. So what you'll find when you make these emulsions, if you try and test the pH after you've made the emulsion, your pH meter will jump all over the place and you'll get all sorts of different readings. And that's simply because you've got movement of water droplets past the probe, but it's not continuous. It's not an oil in water emulsion where the continuous phase is water. So if you're going to need to check and adjust the pH for an active or preservative reason, you need to do that before you form the emulsion. Once you form that emulsion, that pH will remain where it is, as long as you're not then adding anything else that's going to upset that pH later. But like I say, get that done before you form the emulsion. It's very, very difficult to check and adjust later. And of course, if you're using any sort of dyes or colorants, they need to be compatible with that oil phase. Otherwise, again, they're going to be dispersed. If they're, say, water compatible dyes, then they'll be dispersed within the droplets. So you won't get a nice homogeneous, even looking color. So again, everything's kind of flipped in reverse. I do get asked questions about actives in water and oil emulsions. If you can put the active into the water phase before you form your emulsion, if it's water soluble, that's the best way to do it, because adding your water soluble active at the end, you may or may not impact the stability of the formula. What about heat? If those actives are impacted by heat and you have to heat the formula, then the active is no good anymore. So don't use heat sensitive actives if you're going to be heating your water and oil emulsion. And that's probably going to make you say, well, is there another way to make them? If you've just said we need waxy low HLB emulsifiers, you would have to use one of the exception rules, one of the exception materials to create those cold processable emulsions. And that's simply because you can't put a water soluble active into it later without it possibly impacting the stability, not being mixed homogeneously. That's one of your biggest issues, because that water soluble active is going to want to be in the water droplets. You could definitely try formulating that way using high shear to get it into the formula. But then, of course, just remember that active has to get into those water droplets, which are part of the internal dispersed phase. So in other words, you're making it very difficult for yourself. You're making it very difficult to ensure you're going to have long-term stability, and you're going to make it very difficult to ensure a homogeneous emulsion, or even past 6 months of stability in some cases. It depends on the active a little, but just keep those rules in mind. You're better off considering one of the exceptions that can use a cold processable method. There are other low HLB emulsifiers. There are more and more becoming available. You can put together a standard water and oil emulsion without using waxy emulsifiers. You definitely can do that. You'd be using your quatinized clays and your low HLB liquid emulsifiers, low HLB emulsifiers to do that. You definitely need a blend because you want dense packing at the interface for better stability. But again, you're starting to talk, say, needing more experience with these materials and also with your suppliers, so that you can talk with your suppliers about these materials. And you definitely do have some issues with building viscosity in those types of systems. Again, that's your regular types of low HLB emulsifiers that are liquid. That's your regular quaternized clays. Maybe we should talk about the exceptions, because there are some great alternatives when we look at the exception materials. Another question we get often is, why do you often see, say, magnesium sulfate or sodium chloride added to a water and oil emulsion? The reason small amounts of those materials get added is to increase the polarity of the water phase. So again, if we've got these little droplets of water dispersed throughout an oil continuous water phase, you will find that you get good polarity, charge repulsion between those droplets if you have a little bit of salt present. It also makes it more favorable, because when you're using a low HLB emulsifier, even though it's a non-ionic emulsifier, it still will have a polar end. So it will also help basically keep the attraction to the water phase, and of course keep the water droplets repelled from each other. And when you can keep those droplets away from each other for as long as possible, you have better stability. Same concept works when you're working with oil and water emulsions, but you're just using high HLB emulsifiers. And of course then you wouldn't use salt, because it's the continuous phase. In this case, we're putting a little bit of extra charge in the water to make them even more polar than normal, and it does help with some of that stability. I've got some great videos. Again, in the little PowerPoint, I have the PowerPoint with all the hyperlinks. We've got all these different videos there to help you with formulas to get started. We have our creating water and oil emulsions. And again, this is a real basic cover of how to make standard water and oil emulsions. And it's got a formula, of course, with it. I do get asked a lot of questions. How do I solubilize a glycerin-based extract in an oily serum? We do have a video. That's that video link there. Now, in this particular case, you are using a low HLB liquid emulsifier as a solubilizer, and you are basically solubilizing that water soluble, the glycerin-based extract, into the oily serum. But it means you need to use a really, really low input, just like we would use a low input of oil, fragrance oil, or essential oil with a high HLB solubilizer like polysorbate 20, for example, and we mix them first and then add them slowly into the water phase. We do the opposite when we're trying to get a water-soluble extract or a glycerin-based extract into an oily serum. So again, if I'm losing you a little here, it's a lot I'm trying to cover in this one presentation. We do have the video there that explains it for you and also gives you the percentages and guides you through. Just remember, you can't put a very high input of these water-soluble materials into an oily serum, but just like you can't put a lot of an oil into say like a water-based mist or hydrating spray. You've got to have a really low input that's solubilized appropriately. Well, we're doing the same with oil, except we're using a low HLB liquid solubilizing material with a very low input of a water soluble extract, and we're basically solubilizing that in an inverse solubilized type setup into your oily serum. And then I've also got a video on water and oil balm ointments. That was that one that I was explaining about 5% water, and we've got that in a majority oil phase, and that gives you that nice semi-soft balm consistency. It is actually an ointment. Now, because the water content of those formulas is so low, there is what we call such a low available water content that microorganisms cannot grow. In that type of product, in the water and oil balm ointment, you can send it off for what we call available water testing. And if it comes back with a reading of less than 0.6, that's not 0.6%, it's an available water reading of less than 0.6, then no microorganisms can grow. And that's with about 5% water. But you do need to do that testing instead of preservative efficacy testing in the case of a water and oil ointment. And then you don't need to have a preservative because the product is self-preserving. There's not enough available water for any sort of microorganism to grow. So there's another little tip there if you're creating that type of product. Now, exceptions. Let's talk about exceptions. I know you all want to talk about exceptions, and the reason we want to talk about exceptions is it's innovative and it's interesting, and it helps us create these amazing products with fantastic sensory profiles. So there's 3 exceptions that I have on video. There are, of course, a few more materials like this. You'd have to speak with your suppliers direct, but I'll definitely let you know about which materials help us with these exceptions. I have a video, how to make water and oil creams easy, how to make water and oil lotion, and high internal phase emulsions. So they are all your exceptions, materials and rules, and here's some examples of how they work. So when we're making I'm going to come to this one here last, this is actually my favorite. Bentone Luxe WM by Elementis. I'm not paid to say that. I just absolutely love it. I actually use this cream myself that I have in that video. So I'll come to this one last. It's my absolute favorite. But let's talk about some high internal phase emulsions first, because I absolutely love the technology behind these products and the principles behind them. So what they're doing, and again, remember, this is the exceptions. Can I have a big red disclaimer come across the screen? I can't really. Yeah, but an alert going, exception, exception, exception. These are the exceptions. Okay, so these are not your standard rules, but it does help us create some amazing products that still technically have a oil continuous phase. And of course, that then helps mean that we have that better moisture protection from the way the product applies to the skin, because it is technically water, big, massive water droplets inside a very small external oil continuous phase, but we still get the benefits of a water and oil emulsion, but we don't have any greasiness. And we can have anywhere from 60% water or more. One of these high internal phase emulsions has up to 95% water inside in the internal phase. So how do they do it? Well, they gel the water droplets. So a couple of ways you can put these together. One of the first examples here uses some Grant Industry materials, Grand Surf 67, and I have the other one written down there. It is Grand Surf 2106. This is a dimethicone based product. So if you're working with silicon materials, if you want to work with silicons, this is definitely the high internal phase formula for you. And again, I have the videos, I have the formulas available. You can contact the suppliers direct. Just contact us. Remember, info@personalcarescience.com.au, or if you have our Dropbox link already, go to the folder called YouTube Lives. You'll find our water and oil live in that folder. With the hyperlinks, and you can get all the formulas in that folder. So what they do is they gel the water phase droplets. So they would gel using a carbomer or similar, and we want to make sure that that water phase is gelled well. We gel the water phase first well, and then we add it under low shear to these very special materials. Again, remember when I said if we're making a water and oil emulsion using these exceptional rules, we need to use these exceptional materials. So we use a combination of the Grand Surf 2106 and Grand Surf 67, and this helps form that external network. It's based on a dimethicone cross-polymeric network. As you can see, that network is so strong, it is able to stabilize that very large gelled water internal phase. Now, we don't want to use high shear in this case because we don't want to make these droplets small. We want to keep them big. We want to keep them gelled. And then that way, the dimethicone cross polymer can do the rest of the job for us and hold those big, massive gelled water droplets inside that cross polymer dimethicone network. Another high internal phase emulsion uses gel trap technology by Seppic. So they again gel their water phase. You can see some examples there where they again have very large water droplets that are gelled really effectively. One of the tricks is you've got to gel those water droplets really effectively. And then they use their Easy Knob. It's a low HLB emulsifier. This low HLB emulsifier is so powerful that it's able to then stabilize these very large internal water phase droplets. So that's how they're put together. That's high internal phase emulsions. With a gel trap, you can actually feel it. You apply it to the skin and you can feel it break onto the skin. It's a really nice sensory experience. I know that definitely for Asian skincare, if you want to make a water and oil emulsion for Asian skin types, then using one of these high internal phase emulsions is pretty much the only way that they're going to enjoy it. Otherwise, they tend to feel far too heavy or greasy for someone to use. On that note, let's just mention sunscreens and foundation briefly. So when we're making a foundation, so a pigmented foundation product, a liquid foundation, we do find that we get better coverage from lower color input when the external phase is oil. So a lot of times you'll see foundations are actually water and silicon. So it's water droplets in a continuous silicon phase. Now, when you have a continuous silicon phase, you can make products that feel beautiful, amazing. And a lot of color cosmetics are created this way because they do have a fantastic sensory and they do wear very, very well. when you are making a water continuous phase, say a foundation, and then you add your pigments, well, first of all, it can be very difficult to get good coverage and good pigment loading into a standard oil and water emulsion, and that's just because of the amount of pigments you want to use for good coverage and good color. So there can be a challenge there, and a lot of times when people are making, say, more natural water-based foundations, they find they get a lot of balling up because you have to stabilize those pigments using your natural gums or gelling agents, and that can cause a lot of pilling or balling simply because of the amount of gum that you need to stabilize a lot of pigment. You need more pigment when it's a water-based foundation normally, unless you're using a phytic acid coated pigment, of course, which just drops straight into water. I've got videos on all of these topics. I've got water-based foundations with phytic acids in them. If you go to the YouTube channel and if you type in foundation, you'll probably see some choices come up, easy water-based foundation or something like that, and I would be using phytic acid coated colorants in there, and that would be an oil and water emulsion, but still got really good coverage. Otherwise, you'll find that a lot of other foundations out there that have a really beautiful cushiony or silky feeling are probably silicone based, and they're probably a water and silicone emulsion with the pigments present. And it means low pigment loading for a very large amount of color by comparison to if it's a water-based foundation. Sunscreens. High SPF sunscreens tend to need a lot of oil soluble SPF filters in them. And because of that, when you're making a sunscreen, okay, so let's say we were making a standard cosmeceutical product. If we're making a normal cosmeceutical product, we would normally look at it and go, well, do we want to make oil and water or water and oil? We typically want to make, oil and water because that's what a lot of emulsions out there are. And then we tend to add our actives at the end. And that's how we, and everything else that we need to put together. But we make those considerations based on, do we want it to be oil and water or water and oil? And then are we going to add our actives later? When you're making a sunscreen, you can't work that way. You've actually got to figure out which UV filters you're using first. And a lot of that is based on regulatory restrictions. That's why you usually see a lot of combinations of UV filters to achieve a really high SPF. We usually need to use a combination of UV filters because of regulations or restrictions. We can't just add, 15% or 20% of this certain UV filter. We could only add, under regulation, say 5% of that material. Then we need to use 10% of something else. We also need to make sure that we're getting the UVA to UVB ratio correct. There's a lot of other considerations. The short version of it is we're normally picking our filters first and then looking at the input that we need to get the SPF that we require. And then we're thinking, well, hang on, we've got all these oil soluble or oil compatible materials. I need to, blend these with a certain amount of oil-based solvent. In other words, we usually end up with so much oil content of a formula, it by default has to be a water and oil emulsion. So instead of us picking the emulsion in that scenario, we're kind of driven to create a water and oil emulsion simply because we need a lot of the oil soluble filters, and then we need to put them with a lot of oils. Esters tend to get used a lot, and we need to make a water and oil emulsion because of the amount of filters that we need to use and the amount of esters or lipids that we need to help ensure we've got a really good spread on the skin. The better the spread, the better the SPF result as well. And the more homogeneous the formula, the better the SPF as well. My goodness, there's an entire other topic if we start talking SPF. But the point is, a lot of your sunscreens need to be, a lot of your high SPF sunscreens need to be water and oil emulsions because of the solubility of the filters, basically. So let's go now to my very favorite material to create, my favorite new material to create water and oil emulsions. And one of the reasons it's my favorite, like I say, is I actually use this product myself. Bentone Lux WM by Elementis. Now, what they do is they use low HLB emulsifiers and a quatinized clay so that they are actually stabilizing, again, large water droplets. You don't need to gel them in this case, super easy. You've got large water droplets that are stabilized within that quatinized clay network and your low HLB emulsifiers. One of the great things about that material is you can cold process it. It comes as a blend. It's got caprylic cupric triglycerides. It's got 2 low HLB natural emulsifiers. Trying to think of the names off the top of my head. And it's got your stericonium hectorite. And because it's all in the one material, I just need to have my water phase. I just need to put a little bit of oil with, or ester, usually light skin feel natural ester with that. And then I can mix even under low shear. In my video, that is in the video, how to make water and oil emulsions easy. I've also done a couple of other videos using this material recently. You actually see me mixing it with a whisk. And the reason I've done that in the video is to show you just how easy it is to use and how well it holds an emulsion together. When you're first stirring, it doesn't look like it's going to happen. But then all of a sudden it inverts and it becomes this beautiful emulsion. So I definitely recommend, if you are interested in a really nice light skin feel from an almost natural material, don't quote me on this, but off the top of my head, it's around 95% natural. Definitely speak to the supplier to find out for sure. But you've got your stabilizing material in it. You've got your low HLB emulsifiers in there. And you do end up with a beautiful product that really suits the sensory profile. It's still richer than an oil and water emulsion, but it's certainly not heavy or greasy like your more traditional water and oil emulsions can be. Well, I think that's just about me. Over to some questions. So I hope that some of that made sense. There was a lot to cover. Please, if you're not sure, just contact us for the presentation and then watch those additional videos where I also talk you through the formulation concepts behind each of those, solubilizing your water-soluble extracts in oils, how to make your standard water and oil emulsions, all the exceptions videos as well. So some videos I got. How do we adjust viscosity? As I mentioned before, we would tend to use, again, more traditional forms, we tend to use low HLB waxy emulsifiers and then low HLB liquid non-ionic emulsifiers that would then give us about a cream lotion type viscosity. If you want a thicker cream, then you would use more waxy low HLB emulsifiers. That's how you build your viscosity. Of course, how to adjust the sensory is to use your light skin feel esters or use some silicone materials. Now, if you are going to make water in silicone, then use silicones as your sensory agents and then also look for water in silicone emulsifiers. I know my good friends at Grant Industries have some amazing solutions-based materials to make water in silicone emulsions feel out of this world, amazing and really stable. So if you do want some fantastic innovations, I really love their approach. I really love the materials they use. If you are using silicones, if you want water in silicone, even for all your foundations, speak to them. They definitely have that corner of the market covered for sure. I was asked, is there such a thing as a water and oil and water emulsion, and how is it possible? Okay, this is quite advanced emulsion technology. So what they do is they mix water in oil first, and then they will mix that water and oil into, did I get this the right way around? Water and, sorry, they are a bit confusing, water and oil and water. So no, we do water and oil first, and then we put it into water. Now, one of the things there is you do need to use low shear, because of course, if you use high shear, what are you going to do to your original emulsion? You're just going to mix that in. You're going to end up with just a standard emulsion. So it is quite advanced technology. You do need to gel at one step, and then usually under a pressure system, and then you would mix. And again, you can't break the initial emulsion, otherwise it will just revert back to a single phase emulsion rather than the multi-phase emulsion. Quite difficult. And definitely scale up on those need to be watched closely. I was asked about preservatives. So when do we add preservatives if we've got water as the internal phase? You're best to mix the preservative with the water phase, even if it's not totally soluble in the water. It is still miscible with the water and it will still provide its functionality. When we're talking about preservatives, another question I commonly get is, how much do I use? If I'm not using much water, do I use the full input of the preservative? Well, generally speaking, if you're not using the normal, say, oil and water emulsions, you've normally got 80% or more water. And that's what a lot of your preservative guidance from your preservative suppliers is based on, about the performance in an oil and water emulsion. When you've got a water and oil emulsion, again, you tend to have a lower water input than normal. So could you use a lower input of the preservative? Again, I would still stick within the supplier's guide range, but I would look at the amount of water in the formula and think, okay, how much is that compared to, say, a normal, minimum 80% oil and water type emulsion. And if you're only using 25% water, well, you don't have a lot of water to preserve. So I'd use the lower side of the recommended input from the supplier. You should definitely still get your preservative efficacy testing or challenge testing done to test your theory to be sure. But definitely, if you don't have much or as much water present, then you don't need as much preservative as a standard oil and water emulsion would. And as I mentioned, in a water and oil ointment, we've only got about 5% water phase. Usually they're self-preserving. Send it off for available water testing, not preservative efficacy testing. You need to do the different test because you're testing for available water. And if it's less than 0.6, nothing can grow. As an example, and again, that's not 0.6%. Please don't get that mixed up. Most of your jams or conserves are about 0.65. If they're tested for available water, they're about 0.65. So only really opportunistic molds can grow with that small amount of water present, which is why most of your jams and preserves never grow anything, but some will. So when we have any product, anything that has an available water less than 0.6, there's just not enough available water to support microbial growth. So you'd send it for available water testing rather than preservative efficacy testing. I was also asked, can I add extracts in the cool down phase of a water and oil emulsion? Again, if they're water soluble, you are better to add them with the water. Obviously, you'll need to reduce the water content in that case to make sure that the end product's still stable. And then you should look at a cold processing type scenario. And then this goes with all of your water soluble actives. Be very careful if those water soluble actives need extreme pHs that just may not work with a water and oil emulsion. And yeah, try to avoid heat, but have them in the water phase. The other option is if you do add them at the end and you mix them through under high shear, but then you'd need to run stability tests and check how effective was that homogenization, especially during scale up in really large batches. How effective was it at getting that water phase totally emulsified and homogeneous into the internal phase? How effective was it? And again, that would come down to what equipment you're using based on the batch size and the turnover rate of the product in the vessel. You asked about lecithin. So I have a few videos, definitely one video at least on lecithin. Check my YouTube channel. With the lecithins that I use, now I use some from Lucas Meyer, Cargill, and I used one from Nicole. There were lecithins and hydrogenated lecithins, and they all formed oil and water emulsions. So using lecithin as, say, a co-emulsifier in a water and oil emulsion, I'd really want to check the supplier's data before I said, yep, use it. You may be asking about, say, a standard food grade lecithin. Again, as a co-emulsifier, may or may not work for you. I would, again, really want to look at the individual material and any information that the supplier has about use in a water and oil emulsion before I would use it in a water and oil emulsion. From my experience in the materials I've got from suppliers, it's definitely performed better in oil and water emulsions. So I would check it out is my answer, and it could vary depending on the exact material you're using. I think that was all the questions I had before the event. Now let's go over to our viewers. Oh, thanks, Eliana, for your kind words there. Good morning from Nigeria. Oh, good afternoon from Australia. Good morning from India. Oh, my goodness, you guys must be up early. I wonder what time it is there. USA, excellent. I don't think I've got actually any questions here. Here we go. When we have an oil solvable active, should we consider water and oil or oil and water emulsion? I would say more who is the product for and what do you want the product to do. So you could put small amounts of oil soluble actives into oil and water emulsions. In fact, this is done quite often. I would actually say my choice of whether I'm making an oil and water or water and oil emulsion would be based on who the product is for. So for example, I'm 45, Caucasian, I've got dry skin. I find this innovative material with the Bentone Luxe, it's the formula still has, off the top of my head, hey, watch the video, the formula's in the folder. I think there's 60% water in there. And I find that a really nice level of emolliency for my skin. So basically the point is, who is it for? you know, I wouldn't use even that Bentone Luxe material, and that product feels really, really nice for someone with my skin. Even if you gave it to, say, a 30 or 35-year-old Caucasian woman, she might still find it a little heavy on her skin. If you give it to, say, someone 55 Caucasian, I'm picking Caucasian skin here because we are the driest skin type. Hispanic skin, also very dry, also shows signs of aging, and dryness and lack of hydration easiest. Ours is the fastest aging skin. It sucks, trust me. So, you know, we even at 55, I might want something a little heavier, for example. I might want something with more emolliency. Now, if you're sitting watching this and you're 45 and you're Asian and you're in a humid climate, you're probably thinking, oh my God, that sounds disgusting. Why would I want to do that? And you're dead right, because humidity is a big factor in it. The more humid the climate, the lighter the skin feel the product normally. And that's also because the user's skin isn't as dehydrated as your cooler, more arid climates. Like the bottom of New Zealand is extremely dry. If you ever visit there, take extra rich body lotions and face creams, because your skin just feels so much drier, no matter what ethnicity your background is. If you have Asian skin, again, you're not going to really start to see signs of aging as a woman until you're sort of, you know, even preliminary signs of aging until you're in your 50s. So you might not want to look at, say, this Bentone Luxe material for your emulsions until, you know, you're talking about a 50 plus consumer group. In those cases, if you were wanting to create these types of products for that moisture barrier protection, the gel trap product using the Cepic material is a great alternative. So, I mean, back to your original question of, would the active determine the type of emulsion? Not usually, no. Sunscreens, obviously, I had that discussion about sunscreens. They do drive which way you tend to make your emulsion. But otherwise, I would tend to look at what's the skin needs of my consumer. Does she need that extra? Well, and again, I'm saying she because these types of products don't usually suit men. Does she need or want that extra emolliency? Does she need that extra moisture protection? Then yes, using one of these lighter water and oil emulsion formulation types is ideal. And as they get older and more mature skin types, then you could look at your more traditional water and oil emulsions, and they love it, you know. I know the L'Oreal range, they have their red range of products. I think one of their night creams might be a water and oil, but then they've got their gold range, and they used, is it Jane Fonda, I think, as their spokeswoman, and they are water and oil emulsions. They're much heavier products, but that's the type of thing, you know, I'd be out there buying for, you know, the older than me. Again, it would be too heavy for my skin. So look at maybe what the skin needs are of your consumer or your target market. That's who you should be formulating for. Small amounts of oil soluble actives can go into oil and water emulsions. Small amounts of water soluble actives could go into your water and oil emulsions, but when you start to talk 5% or more, you need to be really careful using high shear, things like that, to get them into that internal phase. You know, in a water and oil emulsion, if you want to get it into the water dispersed phase. So just think about those things, and the type of emulsion you're creating. In one of these exception products, having a high input of a water soluble active is not a problem, but they're your exceptions. If you're talking traditional water and oil, it is better if you have an oil soluble active added at the end in the cool down step, just because of the way they're made. But again, I've presented you with several exceptions, and there are more out there. Have a chat with your suppliers. I'm pretty sure Evonik have a low HLB material that might have a blend in it, like the Elementis material. So have a chat with them as well. I haven't used it, but I do think they have one that you might want to investigate. I have two problems as I'm creating transparent vitamin C, E water-based serum, vitamin E solubility issue. Okay, so today's topic is all about water and oil emulsions. I do try and keep to the topic that I'm presenting on, otherwise we have to start talking about different formulation techniques. You will find a variety of different topics on my YouTube channel. I've got about 400 different videos. So go to the YouTube channel, just type in the topic that you're looking for, just a word or two. I've probably already got a video on it for you. You've got a question there about acid as well, which I do have several acid videos. I've got an acid live as well that you'll enjoy. Need an organic gua shampoo. Again, today's topic is all about water and oil emulsions. Again, if you go to my YouTube channel, I have multiple videos on different types of shampoos and putting those types of formulas together. Need to introduce flaxseed oil in shampoo. Again, so shampoos are definitely your water continuous phase products. So I really do want to keep on topic today because I've talked a lot about the formulation technologies that go into these products, as well as the exceptions and the materials that help you build those exceptions. Again, just to reiterate, with the exceptions that I presented, I do get asked a lot, oh, can I use this instead? No, you can't. They're an exception because of the types of materials that enable those emulsions to form. Like I say, if you speak to your suppliers and they have alternatives that can perform the same way, that's fine. But you can't swap out some of the key materials that make these exceptions possible, because then they're just no longer possible. And then you'd go back to your standard water and oil emulsion type formulations. What are the implications in using 100% hydrosol as the water phase without any distilled water at all? The fragrance of the hydrosol should be considered. Absolutely. You can definitely use hydrosol as your water phase in these types of products. You can heat hydrosols and they won't lose their aromatic properties because basically they are the collection of the steam distillation, so they're already been through that heat process. They can definitely be used as the water phase in water and oil emulsions. Yeah, and of course they impart that great aroma. Then you wouldn't need additional fragrance. Of course, being the external phase being oil phase, you can easily add fragrance oils or essential oils to the formula, still be really, really stable. Does anyone else have any other questions on water and oil emulsions or any of this technology? Again, please just email info@personalcarescience.com.au to get this presentation and every single one of our free formulas and reports. We have them all in one folder, so you can spend a whole day binge watching me if you want. Actually, a couple of people have done that. I love it when I hear that. Thank you for binge watching. Wonderful session. Thank you. Thank you for attending. A live session's nothing without some viewers and without some questions. I must say, I thought I'd have a few more questions here. So I either covered the topic extremely well or you're just trying to absorb it all. Either way, it's a really good scenario, really good outcome. And we do have all of these great references that are written and provided absolutely free for you to refer back to. If everyone has finished asking questions, I can wrap it up for the day. Of course, you'll just email through info and then we can send you through the Dropbox link with absolutely everything in it. Anyone got some ideas or topics? I do have a topic in mind for the next live. I'm actually going to talk about conditioners and how they differ if we're, say, talking a leave-in conditioner, spraying conditioner, standard rinse-off conditioner, mask products. So I was going to cover the various range. I do have a few videos on this topic, but we do get a lot of questions about it. So I was going to actually cover that in the next live. If there's other topics that you want to see, just pop it in the chat or email us, info@personalcarescience.com.au. We already do have quite a few lives, so please check out the channel first, see what lives we have run, and then let us know what sort of topics you might want in the live session. Thank you. Thanks, Karama, for watching and saying thank you. Well, I guess for a few of you, it's the early morning, so thank you very much for attending. It's my evening, so I'm going to head into my evening, and I hope you all have an absolutely fantastic day. And I'll chat soon and see you next month when we're going to talk all about conditioning treatments for the hair. Oh, sorry, someone with the ferulic acid. Yeah, so if you go to the YouTube channel, if you go to the live section, you should find a live on acids. We cover a variety of acids there. You should find it in that one for you, and just type it in the search bar at the top. Thank you very much, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you next month when we have our next live. Happy formulating!